All right, thanks, Heidi. I see we're live on YouTube. Should I just go ahead and let everyone in now? There are a few early birds already, or on time, I guess you can say.
Yeah, I think we should go ahead and get started.
Great. All right, thanks, Heidi. I see we're live on YouTube. Should I just go ahead and let everyone in now? There are a few. Here's the live stream. On time, I guess you can say.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Welcome, everyone. So we're going to wait a few more minutes and just let folks trickle in. So thank you. So we'll go ahead and get started in about a minute, just so you're all aware. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you, be here with us on a Saturday morning. I know it's the weekend, and for many, it's your time for yourself. So I appreciate you showing up to be here in our conversation around the budget. Just wanted to highlight that this is in collaboration with the independent budget analyst. Their team is here. They're ready to talk to you all about what the budget cycle looks like and some other important information. And they'll introduce themselves in a few minutes. So I'm excited that you all are part of our conversation today. I know that some folks are already starting to put their names in the chat or just who they're affiliated with. So feel free to also introduce yourselves in the chat so that the community can all connect with one another. And just so you're also aware, we are live streaming this as well. So you might see this on other platforms. So if there's any other folks or community members that you think would love to tune in, but not through Zoom itself, feel free to look out to our social media platforms. We should be dropping the link for the live stream so that you all can tune in on those areas as well. But we'll just go ahead and kick it off. So first, I did want to recognize that we do have interpretation in Spanish happening right now. So if there's anyone who is tuning in through Zoom and you still haven't connected to the Spanish interpretation, please feel free to click on the little globe icon and then you can choose Spanish. Our lovely interpreter, Andrea, is ready, she's going, and any questions that you may have, we also have Marta Zapata from our team who is going to be in the chat. So feel free to put in the chat any questions or support that you may have for Spanish interpretation to make sure that you're all good to go. The IBA and ourselves will make sure that we're talking slowly and really making it easy for the interpreter to keep up. So if there's any disruptions, just know that we're definitely going to pay attention to it and make sure it works as soon as possible for everyone. So we'll just give another minute or a few seconds just so that folks can make sure they're all connected and good to go on that. Okay, so I think we are good to go. So I just wanted to welcome you all again. This conversation is happening until 12 o'clock, so there's going to be a lot of time for any questions that come up and any thoughts that you all would like to share as we're going through the presentation. But before we get into it, I wanted to just have Councilmember Sean Ela Rivera, who represents District 9, to be able to share some few words. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing screen, And then Sean, if you want to go ahead and begin your remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Marianne. Thank you everyone for being here this morning. As Marianne said, we do really appreciate folks taking time out of your weekends to share your priorities with us. And I just want you to know that it is super important. Our district is, as everyone knows, incredibly diverse. It's diverse in terms of neighborhood type. It's diverse in terms of religion, ethnicity, race, you name it. And so the more that we hear from you, the better we can get a sense of what the community's overall needs are, what your desires are, and we can do a better job of in our advocacy as we move through the budget process. I do want to take a minute to kind of brag on our team and how hard they've been working since the budget process started. We have hearings, we have meetings where they could take a few hours, they could take even more than that, but that is just a small fraction of the work that is done. And so just know that your reps have been working incredibly hard to make sure that we're prepared for those, and we can ask questions that are related to the priorities that we've heard from you all prior to this budget process starting, and the feedback that we're getting as it moves along. So I just want to make sure I express the appreciation for the team that they deserve. I also want to say thanks to the independent budget analyst. The IBA, as they are known, is an incredible resource to the council and the community, and is really, really helpful in making sure that as council members, we can show up and do the job that we are supposed to do on behalf of the community as council members. So thank you, IBA, for being here today and for everything you're doing. And then once again, thank you to the community for showing up. And the thing I will conclude by saying is this is obviously not your last chance to weigh in. The budget survey that you will see floating over our team members' heads, that is another way to weigh in. We take that very seriously. Those will all be read. That'll be factored into our advocacy as well. And we encourage you to share that far and wide so that we can make sure that the District 9 community voices are heard. And then we show up with the receipts and the evidence when we are doing the advocacy that we want to do during this process. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. Really appreciate you showing up here. Our budgets are value statements, and we want to make sure that your values are represented, and you being here is a big part of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I'll just give a few seconds to put my PowerPoint back up. So as he mentioned, we do have a survey that's in the chat. And I did want to flag the survey link itself will take you to a survey that is in English. So if you want any support filling out the survey in a different language, please feel free to contact us. We have staff who speak several languages, Spanish, Vietnamese, Somali, and we can support to make sure that your voices are captured and that digital access and language barriers are not an opportunity, is not a barrier that's going to prevent opportunity for you to share your voices. So I just wanted to flag that. And if our team can just put in the chat a phone number for folks to be able to contact us at if they need any support to fill out the survey. Like the council member mentioned, it's really important for us to hear everything that's a priority for you all, and it really informs everything that we do. So thank you for sharing what's important with us. So I just wanted to quickly review what the agenda for today is like. Like we mentioned, the independent budget analysts are going to do their presentation on the city budget. We'll have some time for questions and answers after their presentation, and then we'll be wrapping up around 12. So it's fairly quick and easy sort of presentation style, but if anything, as I mentioned, comes up even throughout the presentation that you all need support or questions on, we have staff who are going to be monitoring the chat, so feel free to drop anything in there that you'd like. And then lastly, I just wanted to review some community guidelines. Remember to please make sure you keep yourself on mute when not speaking. when we have the questions and answers after the presentations, that's when people will be able to unmute to ask their questions. But for now, when you're not speaking, please make sure to keep yourself on mute. Also, please respect the pronouns that individuals go by. We want to make sure that this is a safer space for everyone to be present as they are. And also, just a reminder, going back to the muting, one person, one mic. So this phrase just means when someone is talking, you want to be respectful and mindful that they're the one speaking and to not be interrupting. So just make sure to be mindful of that. And then reminder that when you also are speaking, if interpretation will still be happening even when we enter the questions and answering. So be mindful that while you're speaking, you don't talk too fast and that you try to have some pauses in between for the interpreter to be able to capture everything that you're saying. We want to also be, able to communicate with courtesy and respect. And this is really especially important because, different members of our community are going to have different perspectives. Like Sean mentioned, it's a very diverse district, and naturally that just means there's a lot of diverse experiences and really diverse opinions at the table. So we want to make sure that we're really operating with courtesy and respect and that we are tolerant to one another. And with that, we will go ahead and start the presentation by the IBA. I will start presenting those slides soon, but folks at the IBA, if you want to introduce yourself while I get that set up.
Okay, thank you, Marianne, and thank you, Council Member Elo Rivera, for inviting us to your community forum this morning. We're very pleased to be here and be able to speak to some of your constituents. Before I get started, I want to introduce two colleagues of mine who will be joining me for this morning's presentation. The first is Jillian Cassie. She is our lead on infrastructure, homelessness, and affordable housing. And we also have Baku Patel, who is our lead analyst on police, fire rescue, park and rec, and library. So have a couple of our best analysts joining me this morning to answer any questions you might have. With respect to our presentation this morning, it's going to be an overview of kind of roles and responsibilities and how the city's budget process works and where we are in this year's budget process. It takes about 15-20 minutes, and I'm going to be splitting the presentation with Jillian Cassie. She'll do the first several slides, and then I will conclude the presentation. And then after that, we'll be available to answer any questions you might have. So if you're ready for us to start, then we'll go ahead and I'll throw it to Jillian.
Right, let's get started. First, I want to start with who we are. We're the Office of the Independent Budget Analyst, and our mission is to provide clear, objective, and unbiased analysis and advice to the City Council and to the public regarding all legislative items that have a fiscal and policy impact to the city. So we do this by providing support to the City Council and its committees. And through that, we do provide information for the public. There are items that come through the committees and council that request information and request approval for things. And so we provide input in those matters. And then one of our major functions is to provide a review and analysis of the mayor's proposed budget and related budget reports. And finally, we make recommendations on financial reports and policy matters that are important to the city and the community. Next slide. So why is the city's budget important? The budget reflects the city's priorities. There are a limited amount of funds to support a lot of different priorities that people have. There are, what you see on the slide, there are a number of priorities that are included in the budget. We have police and fire that provide a lot of quality of life impacts to the community. There's also infrastructure. The budget supports, maintenance of our streets and street lights and traffic signals. We've got park and recreation facilities. And just to name a couple other ones, the city has expanded its role in homelessness services. So we've got funding for that. And budget also reflects policies like the Climate Action Plan to mitigate greenhouse gases. Next slide. So on this slide, we show the fiscal year 2022 general fund budget by department. Just want to kind of define a couple terms here. Fiscal year starts with July 1st. So we're talking about this July going all the way through June. So that's what we call fiscal year 2022. And the general fund budget, the general fund is the bucket that we put major tax revenue into. So we're talking about property tax, sales tax, and hotel tax. Those are kind of the major ones. And so that fund, the general fund, funds all the different wedges on this pie chart that you see. And as you can see, police and fire make up over half of the proposed general fund budget. And then there's also a significant wedge for what's called citywide programs. It's not a particular department, but it does fund citywide services, such as if we have like an election, it's not attributed to any one department. Parks and Recreation is another big wedge of this pie chart, and transportation, again, they cover streets, sidewalks, traffic signals. They stripe the roads and make different lanes, bike paths, and things like that. Next slide. So now I'm going to go over the major roles of the mayor, council, as well as our office. So during the budget process, the mayor is responsible for proposing a balanced budget to City Council by April 15th. And then he also updates this proposed budget during May, mid-May. It's actually going to come out this following week. We call it the May revision. So he updates it for any revenues changes or any expenditure changes that he wants to make. And then finally, once the budget is adopted, he's responsible for carrying out the city's goals, policies, programs, and services that are reflected in the budget. Next slide. Now for council. So council is responsible for, first of all, during the budget process, they prepare budget priority memoranda. So it's kind of what it sounds like. Each council office creates a memo that includes their highest budget priorities, and then that's submitted to our office. We compile all that information, submit a report, and the mayor considers these priorities for inclusion in his proposed budget. The council can also change any line items or programs in the mayor's proposed budget, as long as the budget remains balanced. And then the council is responsible for reviewing and making a final determination on the proposed budget. So final budget adoption needs to happen on or before June 15th. The council also provides a lot of different opportunities for public input. So this is one of them. It's a virtual budget town hall. Other districts do them as well. And then we've got 2 evening council meetings that are specifically scheduled to hear public comment. The next one and the last one is going to be on Monday evening starting at 6 p.m. And then we've also just finished 5 days of budget hearings. We covered all city departments and also took public comment there as well. Next slide. So what does our office do during the budget process? As I said before, we do review and analyze the mayor's proposed budget. We do this in a pretty quick time frame. Over a 2-week period, we identify what's in the budget, any changes over the previous years, and also impacts to city services. It's a good resource for the council and for the public to know what's in the budget and various recommendations. We also provide support through the city to the city council and the budget review committee by answering questions throughout the process and being available as a resource. We also review the proposed changes to the budget that is submitted by council members, and we develop a final budget recommendation report that council considers as it approves the final budget in June. Next slide. And so even though the budget is adopted on or before June 15th, the process can last a little bit longer if the mayor vetoes a change that the council makes to the proposed budget. But then the council can override a mayor veto with 6 votes. After the budget is adopted, the mayor, council, and IBA, we all monitor expenditures, revenues, and significant city programs throughout the fiscal year. And then once the budget is complete, the mayor is the only one that can initiate changes to the budget during the fiscal year. Now I'm going to hand it over to Jeff.
Great, thank you, Jillian. Next slide. So the city's budget is really a year-long process, and this slide shows the kind of the annual cycle of the budget development. And it really begins in the fall each year. So in November, the city's Department of Finance produces something called a 5-year financial outlook. That's a look forward over the next 5 years. It projects our major revenues and known expenses. And we do that for the purpose of identifying whether or not we think we're going to have be on track. In other words, our revenues meet our expenditure forecast, or whether we're going to have a surplus or projected deficit. And in recent years, we've had projected deficits. And then kind of moving along the top, in December and January, the city's departments begin communicating with the Department of Finance with respect to each of their individual budgets. When we get into January and February, a couple of important things happen. The first is that we ask each council member to submit their budget priorities for the coming year to our office. And we do that so that we can then identify where the consensus priorities lie. And we bring those back to council for them to adopt their budget priorities resolution. That's the way the council can convey their budget priorities to the mayor for possible incorporation into his proposed budget in April. The other thing that happens in the January-February timeframe is that we get what's known as the mid-year budget monitoring report. It tells us how we're doing in the current year. Are we over budget? Are we under budget? Are we on target? Again, this year, we projected a big deficit in the current year. So we had some real challenges going into this year's budget process. Moving down along the right side in February and March, the departments and the Department of Finance continue to discuss the development of their budget. And then in the bottom right, in April, we get the mayor releases his proposed budget on April 15th. It's required that he do so in the city's charter, and it must be a balanced budget. And then as Jillian alluded to, we then begin, our office, the independent budget analyst, begins its comprehensive review of that budget. We track all changes year over year, and we identify issues and make comments for the council's consideration and for the public. We released our report this year on April 30th, and then we move into early May. And the first 2 weeks of May are dedicated to department budget hearings. So every department comes before the city council. They present their budget. Council members are allowed to ask questions, and the public is able to call in and make comments. And we just concluded that last week. And now we're moving in later in May. We get the next 2 big reports, which are the May revised and the third quarter budget monitoring report. Those inform the council as to any recent developments in revenues and expenditures. It's kind of the latest forecast of where we stand in the current year and what it's looking like going into the next year. And then when that's done, our office then asks the council members to, again, now the council members have had the benefit of seeing the mayor's proposed budget, seeing our report, hearing from the departments and the public, and then we ask them for their final budget modification priorities. They again send us memos. We look at all those memoranda and we try to make a suggested approach for adoption of a final budget. The council does that in the second week of May, and they will finally adopt their budget, modifying anything they see fit to within the mayor's budget. And then about a month later, they adopt something called an appropriations ordinance, which effectuates their budget. So that's how the cycle works. And let's go to the next slide. So the city has faced very large shortfalls, I mentioned, and it's no different this year. In the current year, that budget monitoring report I mentioned showed a deficit in the current year. This was in January of 85.4 million. We now know it's closer to 50 million, but it's still a large deficit that we have to reconcile. The mayor's 5-year financial outlook that was released last November showed a projected deficit for the coming year, fiscal 22. Again, that's the year beginning July 1st of this year, of 124.4 million. But we knew that was understated, and the new mayor corroborated that in January in the State of the City address, where he acknowledged that the budget deficit was really more like 150 million or more. And so it was a pretty daunting situation. Fortunately, in March, the federal government adopted the American Rescue Plan Act, which provided, this slide shows 306 million. We now know it's about 300 million of federal relief funding that will help us close the deficits in the current year, fiscal 21. It'll help the mayor balance his budget for fiscal 22. And will probably allow us to leave some money to help for a projected shortfall in fiscal 23. Next slide. So this slide shows how the COVID-19 pandemic has negatively impacted city revenues. When we talk about city revenues, we talk usually about major revenues, and the city's 4 major revenues are property tax, sales tax, transient occupancy tax, which is really just a visitor tax or hotel tax, and franchise fee revenue. So each of the bars on this bar chart with different colors represents those 4 major revenues. The green line on the top shows how revenue growth would have continued at the city had we not been impacted by the pandemic. And then the blue line that starts to deviate lower beginning in fiscal 2019 shows where we're actually coming in and forecasted to come in because of the pandemic. So doesn't look like much on this chart, but the loss in revenues in the current year, fiscal 2021, was in excess of $100 million. Most of that from the transient occupancy tax or the visitor tax. Also, sales tax was down. So this just shows how significantly we've been impacted by the pandemic. Fortunately, we have the federal relief funding that we are hoping is going to be able to bridge the shortfall until such time as the city's revenues can recover to pre-pandemic levels. And we believe that, or hope that will happen by fiscal 2023. Next slide. So I mentioned the council adopts their budget priorities resolution. That's their way of signaling to the mayor what they would like to see him include in his proposed budget, which is released on April 15th. And this year, these were the top priorities that were identified by the city council. Again, these were the priorities identified by a majority of city council members. So maintain core services like library hours, have some funding to address homelessness and housing issues in the city, park and recreation programs, community relief, renters relief, relief for small businesses. They wanted to see some funding to address the city's climate action fund, action plan and its goals. The council created a climate equity fund to address infrastructure related issues in communities of concern. There's a lot of discussion about how do we adequately compensate our employees to attract and retain the best employees for the city of San Diego. And there was interest in funding, more funding to support our arts and cultures programs in the city. Next slide. So on April 15th, the mayor released, as he always does, his proposed budget for the coming year beginning July 1st. It was a balanced budget. It totaled, the general fund budget totaled $1.73 billion. And the mayor used a variety of mitigations to balance his proposed budget. In fact, he had to, in order to continue the services from last year, add some services that he wanted to add for this year and accommodate some cost adjustments that happened. He needed to identify $209 million of resources to present a balanced budget. And by far the largest mitigating factor or resource that was used was the federal relief funding. And as noted in this slide, the current plan calls for using 51 million to balance the current year budget. Plan calls for using 141 million to balance his proposed budget for fiscal 22. And what's not shown here is it also saves about 107 million for the next year's budget, fiscal year 2023, because we have a projected shortfall in that year as well. Next slide. So this slide shows that pie chart represents the 209 million that I referenced that the mayor needed to identify to balance his budget. As I mentioned, the American Rescue Plan Act was about 67% of that, 141 million. There were $15 million in budget reductions. That's the red wedge towards the top. Most of that was proposed reductions to the library system. And there was also a reduction of $4 million in police department overtime. The next item was the infrastructure fund waiver. The city, pursuant to a ballot measure that was adopted back in 2016, makes an annual contribution to what we call the infrastructure fund to address streets and sidewalks and a whole array of infrastructure issues. That was to be $20.3 million this year. The council is allowed to waive that, and the mayor has asked that they do that. There is 7.9 million in a pension payment stabilization reserve that's being used. The mayor hopes to garner about 8.8 million from a new franchise agreement, minimum bid. That's been included. There were some various fund balances that total about 6.9 million, and there was a class action settlement of about 9 million. Add those all up, it's about 209 million, and that's what enabled the mayor to balance his proposed budget. Next slide. So what was included in the mayor's proposed budget? The top bullets kind of highlight a couple of the key items. There was 15 million for what the mayor's characterizes as Back to Work San Diego program. That included 10 million in small business loans. These are forgivable loans to small businesses throughout the city. There was another $1 million in community grants that will be administered by the city council members. And there was 3 million in various forms of youth programming. Mayor also has 10 million for what he calls his Sexy Streets program. That 10 million is anticipated to be combined with about 30 million in bond financing. And it's going to be used to provide streets, sidewalks, street lights, bike lanes, or it can be used for any of these things. And it's going to be focused in communities of concern. And I think a lot of that will find its way to District 9. There's also $10 million in one-time funding for various homelessness programs. Notably, amongst those, there is more money for the rapid rehousing program that's run by the Housing Commission. There'll be more money for homelessness outreach, and this is intended to provide funding for about 300 more shelter beds. There's also $2.5 million for a new stormwater funding strategy. We have a huge backlog of stormwater issues in the city, and that $2.5 million is to develop a long-term financing strategy to begin to meaningfully address that backlog of needs. We also have 1.1 million for the new Commission on Police Practices that was created pursuant to a ballot measure last March. That's for the administration of the new commission. We do have some significant changes. We had a giant increase in our pension plan contribution, 36.8 million this year. It was attributable to actuarial changes and also investment performance. And then as was noted, we have a proposed reduction of 6.9 million for city libraries, but the mayor has since come out and indicated that he has a plan to restore his proposed cuts. Next slide. So most of what the council identified as priorities in their for the mayor in the proposed budget were included, but some were not. I just mentioned the library hours that the mayor recommended eliminating library hours on Sundays and Mondays and eliminating about 100 full-time equivalent positions. There was a lot of expression of dissatisfaction about that, and the mayor has now come out and promised to restore those hours over the course of the next year. The city has a Penny for the Arts program. It's really a funding goal for the arts communities and arts programs in the city. The funding this year was reduced by $654,000, but the city still remains about $10 million below its goal. So that was not addressed in this budget. There were some other across the board efficiency reductions that may lead to some reduced services like weed abatement. And there really wasn't any funding for new parks or improvements to recreation facilities in this budget. Next slide. And so these are some of the key issues that we're still trying to address. We have some continued uncertainty about COVID-19 pandemic. How quickly will the city recover? How quickly will our tourism economy recover? It's important because we need to know how quickly our revenues will be back. One of our biggest problems is we have a very large backlog of deferred maintenance and capital projects in the city. Every January, we produce a 5-year capital outlook, which looks at our known funding for infrastructure projects and our known needs. And this year it told us that we have a backlog of over $3 billion over the next 5 years in general fund infrastructure. And I should note that this backlog has been growing year to year. We continue to struggle for what are the appropriate service levels we should have in certain operating departments like libraries, just mentioned that, and the police department. We continue to try to address the city employee compensation issues. There's money built into this year's budget, but it may have to be upwardly augmented to address labor negotiations that are being finalized right now. And then we continue to look for new ongoing sources of revenue so that the council can begin to address longstanding problems that will need an ongoing revenue source to address over the years to come. Issues like salaries, infrastructure, and new needed services in the city. Next slide. So these are the next steps in the process. I mentioned that we've just gone through the second bullet there, the budget review committee hearings. There is one remaining public meeting left on May 17th where the public can call in and express their concerns about the budget. Next Thursday or May 18th, the mayor will release his May revision and his third quarter budget monitoring report. Those two reports will be discussed on May 20th. That's kind of an update on where we stand with revenues and expenditures, both in the current year and the coming year. On May 26th, we'll ask the council members to issue their final budget modification suggestions to our office. And then on June 9th, the council will have their budget deliberations and adopt their budget for the coming year. On June 9th, we'll issue our report with a suggestion for the council members. And on June 4th, they will adopt their final budget. And then on June 29th, they adopt the appropriations ordinance. Next slide. And one more. So this slide just shows you how you can connect with our office and get more information. Our web address is listed there. Our review of the proposed budget is the first web link you see there. And then below that, we have two other resources that might be of interest. One is a citizen's guide to how the city's budget process works. And the one at the bottom is a citizen's guide to how the infrastructure budgeting process works. And we have other resources and all our reports there. So we would invite you to log into our website and get information or call us and ask questions. Next slide. And then here's just some other city budget information you might be interested in. The first link is to a budget visualization tool that was developed by city departments. And then the actual city budget document itself is that second link on this slide. And that would conclude our presentation, and we'd be very glad to answer any questions you might have. And I'll turn it back to Marianne or the council member. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff and Joanne, for your comments and your presentation. So we are now open to the questions and answers portion. We have about 10, 15 minutes for us to be able to answer any questions that community members have. So we'll wait just a few seconds to see if any questions have been brought up. Sorry, I'm checking the chat right now. Okay, so one question that came from Lorna. Lorna Zukas had asked, are there any ideas or plans for introducing new revenue streams?
Well, yeah, there's been, I mentioned the plan that's being developed for stormwater funding. There's been discussion. There hasn't been a decision to move forward yet, but there's been a lot of talk about potentially a ballot measure in 2022 to raise money for stormwater needs. There's been some talk about, possibly beginning to charge for trash collection in the city for single family homeowners. We kind of have a situation now. We're one of the only cities in the country that doesn't charge for trash collection. And it's kind of creates an equity issue because multi-family homeowners, businesses pay for trash collection, but those who have single family homes do not. So that's a possibility. Lots of things are being discussed, but it's quite a challenge in San Diego to put a measure on the ballot and get sufficient voter support.
Thank you. Lorna, I see your hand is raised. Is there another piece to your question that you want to ask the IBA? It says your audio is still connecting. Lorna, since your audio is still connecting, we'll go on to the next person, but we can come back to you.
Marianne, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you now.
Sorry, I'm on my phone and I don't usually do my Zoom meetings on phones, so I'm figuring it out. My question was, how often does the city change its budget projections? I'm thinking that since property tax revenue seems to be one of the big revenue sources with the housing market the way it is now, it seems to me the budget's going to get a lot more money than might be projected at the moment.
Yeah, we're constantly monitoring the city's major revenue sources. That's done by the Department of Finance, and our office overlooks what they're doing. We have some outside consultants and other resources that we touch base on. And I mentioned the May revise and the third quarter budget monitoring report. Those will be the most recent look at where those revenues stand, both in the current year and where we expect them to be in the coming year. So yeah, throughout the year, we monitor those, and it'll be particularly important in the coming year because we're using a lot of one-time revenue to fund ongoing expenses, and we're doing that with federal relief funding, but the hope is that we'll be able to replace that one-time money in the form of federal relief with a restoration of our long-standing revenue sources like property tax.
Marianne, can I tack onto that real quick? Thanks. So Lorna, I think an important thing to note is, so the one thing that the IBA does is they, as you saw at the beginning of the presentation, they give objective analysis, right? And over and over and over again, they've been telling the city, we need to increase revenue, that the revenue that's coming in doesn't match the work that needs to be done, the services that city council is even asking for. That's years. Some of these things they've been pointing out for decades. So, there's the work that the IBA does to point it out to us, and then it's upon the council and the mayor to act on that, right? And then, when it comes to increasing revenue, I think we have to do is earn the trust of folks like yourself to so that you can trust that whatever increase in revenues there are will be put to the uses that the community needs. Right? I want to make sure that the group here knows that the IBA, their job is essentially done when they've flown the flag and said, "Hey, get more money. You need more money," and then it's a matter of political will and the job of us in elected leadership to act on that and to do that in partnership with the community.
Thank you both. We know that the next person who had her hand raised is Senora Delia. So before you speak, we're gonna go ahead and Andrea, if we're gonna stop the interpretation for a bit so that Andrea can translate in real time. Martha, it's okay. We'll go ahead and have Andrea translate in real time, so it's just easier. And then Heidi, you can just let me know when that's all good to go.
I turned it off, so we should be ready to go now.
Perfect. Lydia, you can ask your question or comments. I see your hand is raised. You can just take yourself off mute.
Así, tengo varias preguntas. La primera que hice, si no mal recuerdo y que escribí en el chat, es qué tan involucrado está la oficina del señor Elo con lo que estamos... ¿Mande?
Sigue prendida. Ok. Gracias. Adelante.
¿Le repito la pregunta?
Sí.
Ok. Hice varias preguntas. Una de ellas es qué tan involucrado está el señor Elo Rivera en lo que es lo que nos está preocupando ahorita, que entre la línea morada dentro de la comunidad de City Heights. Esa es una. No sé
A ver, vamos a repetir esa pregunta. Delia is asking, how involved is Sean Elo's office in the development of the purple line that is being proposed for City Heights? Adelante.
¿Sigo preguntando?
Sí.
Ok. Espero respuestas. La siguiente también es que a nosotros nos importa mucho que él como nuestro representante lleve nuestra voz al mayor para que él también voltee, el mayor voltee para City Heights y vea que aquí también hay necesidades. Necesitamos que haya bibliotecas en nuestra comunidad. Eso nos importa mucho y nos importa mucho también que ustedes, los que nos representan, inclusive el mayor por cual votamos, también guarde de su budget dinero para darle por lo menos un pequeño incentivo a los voluntarios que trabajamos arduamente por todos ellos.
Déjame repetir, Delia, por favor. Delia is saying we are depending on you, Sean, to take our voices back to the mayor. In City Heights, we still need a good library. And we are also requesting that you consider incentives for economic incentives for community volunteers that are working so hard to make things happen in the community.
También algo que nos importa mucho a nosotros es que nosotros como comunidad recibimos toda la información por correo electrónico solamente en inglés. Yo algunas veces trato de hablar en inglés, pero no sé leer en inglés, ni sé escribir en inglés. Y creo que nuestra comunidad multicultural merece tener interpretación y traducción en nuestros idiomas. Estuve en una junta de SANDAC y alguien dijo que no nos mandaban nada porque parece que no nos importa. Sí nos importa, pero no sabemos leer. Muchas comunidades no saben leer en inglés ni escribir, pero si tratan de guardar un poco de dinero para interpretación y traducción, participaremos y nos daremos cuenta lo que pasa en nuestra comunidad. Gracias.
So we also care a lot about linguistic equity and making all of this accessible for our multicultural communities in different languages. In my case, I receive a lot of emails and I receive a lot of electronic correspondence, but it is only in English. And my reading and writing English is not very strong. And we want to suggest that you put aside a budget for interpretation and translation services. We do care, but we need this information to be accessible to us in our different languages. Thank you.
Gracias.
Gracias, Delia. We're gonna go ahead and if you had interpretation in Spanish, you can get back on. And then one of our team members actually will be answering one of the questions Senora Delia had. Julio, you can go ahead.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Delia, for the question. So in regards to the purple line, we are working with Sandex staff to make sure that we have a good planning strategy, a good planning process to have the purple line City Heights station be accessible and a safe, station for our community members. That funding would come from a ballot tax measure in the near future. It wouldn't come specifically from our city budget. But the connection here is that we are investing in safer streets and what Mayor Targloria has called sexy streets, right? To make sure that when people are walking, biking to these stations, they're able to get there safely and avoid any incidents. As you may know, City Heights has had a lot of accidents, pedestrian and cycling accidents in the past, and we are trying our best and prioritizing more improvements to our roads and to our crosswalks and to our overall built environment.
And then, thank you, Julio. If I can just really quickly with respect to language access. So it gets confusing, I think, because there's the communication from our office and then there's communication from the city, right? Everything from our office, and I might be missing it when I say everything, but I think we're translating everything at this point, or just about, into Spanish, and more often than not into Vietnamese as well. So we want to make sure that because Delia, you are right. It's a matter of access and being able to participate in your democracy. It's going to take more time to get the city to do that as a whole. And we will continue to advocate so that everyone in every neighborhood can, engage with government as we want you to.
Thank you. And then we did have one additional question that Linda Pennington had asked in the chat. What is the $4 million reduction to the police? It is difficult to get an officer out even for something very serious as they're having to focus on violent crime.
I'll let Baku Patel answer that. He's our specialist in the police realm.
Yeah, thank you, Linda, for the question. The $4 million that is being reduced for the police department's budget is related to overtime, and there's a couple different categories within there. 1 million is related to neighborhood policing. It's mostly surrounding homeless related issues around the city. So $1 million in overtime for neighborhood policing. Another $1 million is the Clean SD program that the police department is involved with, along with the Environmental Services Department. And then the last $2 million is what they refer to as extension of shift, which is a more general type of overtime when an officer shift either started early or ended late for an approved reason, if there's some event or something has come up requiring that officer to come either early or later. And the department said that they would try to be more judicious in how they authorize that overtime in order to achieve that reduction. Of course, as you noted, with respect to your comment on violent crime increasing, the department's also noted that if circumstances arise requiring that overtime to occur, they would authorize it even above budget levels. But it is their intent to try to achieve $2 million reduction with respect to that type of overtime.
Baku, if I can just a quick from kind of the council side of that, I think, Linda, one of the things that you've pointed out here is about response times, and that is something that just speaking for myself, I recognize, but there's multiple ways to improve response times. And the thing that we're really trying to focus on is addresses the latter part of your question, right? Which is response times, especially to serious issues. And what we know right now is that the police themselves, the chief, the head of their union, and advocates for reduced police spending are all saying that there should be less on the police plate right now than there is. And so I think one of the things that this council is committed, seems to be committed to, and we are, is balancing that part out so that we aren't sending police to everything, because there's various reasons why we don't think that that's a healthy way to continue as a city. So I think what you're probably seeing is the beginning of that, the balancing that so many folks have been looking for. Again, to me, it's pretty fascinating that it actually comes from people who are often diametrically opposed in terms of their positions on what the role of police should be in society. There's actually some alignment there, and the reductions thus far have been pretty squarely in that, I think, pretty squarely in that, in where that overlap is.
Thank you. So I see we're right at time. I was wondering if the IBA has any closing comments that they'd like to wrap up with. Thank you all so much for being here.
I just say that, again, I express our appreciation for you guys asking us to come to your community forum. We're here to serve both the council and the public. So if you have questions, please send them our way, either through your elected representative, Councilmember Ela Rivera, or contact us directly on our website. Visit our website for resources and information. And thank you.
Thank you all so much. Again, I appreciate everybody for being here. We will make sure that you have our office contact information so that if there are any questions that you have, you can feel free to call us or email us. So if someone from our team is able to drop that in the chat right now. And then just a reminder to, once again, make sure you fill out the survey link as well. Share that far and wide. This is live streaming on both YouTube and I believe Facebook, so it should be able to be housed on those channels of ours. But hopefully we'll be able to put this up on our actual budget page on our District 9 site. So we want to make sure that this is information that is usable and accessible even beyond just this conversation today. And as was mentioned, any questions that you have for the IBA or for our team, please feel free to reach out to us, and then we will make sure that we get an answer to you as soon as possible on that front. This is just part of the piece of the conversation. It's not the start nor the end. So I want to know that we are committed to making sure that we can be as supportive as possible. And then lastly, Councilmember Ela Rivera, if there's any last comments that you would like.
I thank you again to the IBA, Jeff, Jillian, Baku, for being here and all the work that you all do. And then the community, obviously, for your questions, for your comments, and then everyone who's on here. Pretty much every name I see is a name that I am familiar with. And you are folks who are heavily invested in your community, putting a ton of work in. You were putting a ton of work in prior to me being elected, prior to some of us living in San Diego or even being born. And so I just want to express my appreciation for everything that you've put into making the neighborhoods of District 9, what they are. And then, as Marianne said, this is just supposed to be part of the conversation. And we use this phrase about breaking down the walls of City Hall so that you all can be, more able to participate in your government. And part of that is making sure that you all feel comfortable letting us know when something doesn't make sense. Sometimes things are not right. And then there's other times where the way that we are talking about them makes it more difficult to understand than it should be. We use phrases like deferred maintenance, and what that really means is stuff that should have been fixed already, right? And so when something doesn't make sense because of the language that we're using, please don't ever feel like you can't ask, what does that mean? Because we want you to understand, because the better that we all understand it, the better that we can fix, the things that need fixing. So I just want to make sure that I extend that invitation for you all to continue to engage with our office. And one more time, say thank you to the IBA, the District 9 team, and then obviously the community for your engagement, your advocacy. And I really hope you'll stay engaged in the process. every single time that there's an opportunity to call in and have your voices heard. We always love to hear D9 voices. They're usually especially powerful and really do make an impact on the conversation. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you all so much. We appreciate you all being here, and any additional information, please feel free to reach out to us. We put our phone number so you can call. And like we mentioned, several of our teams speak several languages, so please contact us in any language that you would prefer, and we will make sure we get back to you. Thank you, everyone.